Hello, welcome to the Craft House Magic Set of tutorials. Today I'm going to show you how I made this cute little reindeer. Now this is either to go on the Christmas tree, or you can make a few of them and make like bunting or something, which is semi-Christmas themed. Of course it's Rudolph because it's got a red nose, but you could do a different coloured nose if you wanted to. But I basically wanted to do it as a sort of young deer with cute little antlers, and something nice and simple that you can make for Christmas. You can make them as Christmas gifts or just make them for your own Christmas tree or Christmas decorations. So what do you need to make your reindeer? So what I've got is your main body of fabric. This is about 8 inches by 4 inches, but as long as you've got some scraps of felt, I'm sure it'll be enough. You can normally get those squares of felt that you buy for separate colours. That should be plenty. I've got a secondary colour for like the face and the ears, the antlers and the spots on the back, and I've just got a 4-inch square there, but that's way more than I need, to be honest. So if you've just got a tiny little scraps like about that much, that'll be plenty. I've got a small scrap of red to do the nose, but obviously that's a lot smaller than the square that I've got. Just make sure that I've got plenty. And then I've got a 4.5 inches of ribbon, but you could use it a bit longer if you wanted to. Mine's quite a short little hook. As well as those materials, you need your standard sewing materials like some pins. I've got some really short applique pins here which make it a little bit easier. I've got my embroidery needles because they've got a nice large head. You could of course use chenille needles as well, just as long as you can get your thread through the holes and it's a nice sharp needle. I've got a range of colours here. I've just got red, brown and black to sew the various parts of the reindeer, but you can do it in the colours that you want to. I've got one of those heat erasable pens, and if you're going to trace your pattern, you're going to need a pencil as well, and obviously paper if you're going to trace it. And you could potentially print this straight onto card and use the card templates. So I will do a printout that you can download from my website. If you have purchased the advent calendar, the pattern will come to you by email, but you can buy the pattern separately on my website. There's no instructions in it, but there's the pattern pieces to cut out and then a schematic of what the final piece would look like. So what we need to do to start with is cut our pieces out. To be honest, the cutting out is probably the fiddliest part of this. So there are two ways to get your pattern onto the material. You can either trace your pattern pieces onto freezer paper, which is this type of paper here. It's got like a waxy side which you can iron onto the material, but I have found when I've been doing the more detailed pieces that it does sort of come away from the fabric a little bit, so it might be more advisable to trace the actual pattern onto the fabric using a heat erasable pen, and you can just hover and iron over it afterwards to get any marks away after you've traced it out and cut it out and everything. So that's what I'm going to do. This would be easier with a cardboard cutout rather than the freezer paper really, but I'd already cut it out to try out that technique when I did the first one. So I'm just going to hold the pattern pieces. You can pin it actually to make it easier. I'm actually doing this on a piece of wool it's like an ironing pad, so I can just pop my pin straight into the bottom fabric just to keep it still, which is handy. And I'm just going to try and trace around this as neatly as possible. I'm making quite hairy lines because I find these pens, when you're trying to draw them onto felt, they don't mark as nicely as they would if you were doing it on paper. But when I'm cutting out, I'll try and smooth the line out as I'm cutting out. So I want to trace 2 of these main body pieces. On your pattern piece it tells you how many pieces you need to cut out so that you don't have to look back at this video every time. And once you've done one, it's really, really simple. So there's one traced out, and you can see that'll be much easier to cut that out because the pattern piece won't move away from the actual paper. I'm going to turn my material around and do exactly the same on the other side, and I'm going to go along. I won't take a video of all of this, but I'll trace out all the pattern pieces that I need in the different materials and I'll take it from there. So I've actually flipped this pattern piece because this felt one side is slightly different to the other, so I flipped it so that I can make sure I've got two sides that look similar. It doesn't really matter, I don't suppose anybody else will notice, to be honest, but that's what I've done. If there's a felt where you've got a really noticeable difference, this will help you though, flipping the pattern piece. So I've done the main fabric. This bit here is the piece that goes between the ears at the top to make it 3D. So those are the pieces made out of the main fabric, and I'm going to go on to the contrast now. The really small circles, you could probably just cut them out by eye, but I wanted you to have some sort of guide as to the shape to do it. But I did cut the ones out by eye on the first one that I did, rather than trying to trace out a tiny little small circle. Well, not circle. Each of these bits I've got to do twice. Alternatively, if you didn't want to do all these tiny little pieces of felt applique, you could embroider straight onto it the shape. Right, time to cut all of this out. That's the noses. It's quite a good idea to try and pin them to somewhere so it keeps all the pieces safe with these tiny pieces. I'm going to choose which side I'm going to have as the front. I'll have the side that hasn't got the pen marks on as the front, just in case it doesn't come off with the heat. I have tried it, but I just advise people to do that. Now I've got these pieces to go on the face. I'm just going to pop all the details on and pin it in place so that I know everything's okay. And if I'm not happy with a piece, I can just trim a little bit off, because sometimes when you draw the lines onto the felt you can't see it very well, so you don't always make a completely accurate line. So you can see where everything's going to be. I'm going to now take the antlers, and these are to be folded over. So I'm going to pin, I'm just going to stick one pin in here to sort of hold it in place. Right, now it's time to do some sewing. I'm collecting all the pieces here because I'm actually going to use that to stuff the reindeer as I'm working along. So I'm going to use a brown thread to join all the applique pieces onto each side of the reindeer before I start to join them together. So I'm going to take 2 strands of brown thread, I take one out at a time, and then it doesn't knot. You just pull one piece, and then 2. I'm just going to use one of my embroidery needles here because it's got a nice big eye. I'm going to do a quilter's knot at the end. 1, 8. So I think I'm going to work on one of the reindeer first. I'm going to put the pins into the actual fabric rather than pinning onto this surface just for now. I know that when I was trying to pin these on before, these little tiny bits, there's no point in trying to put 2 bits of the pin through the tiny piece. I just push the end through the material. So there we go. It looks a bit all rucked up with the pins in, but it just makes sure that everything is in place. Now with this face piece, my aim is to just go round this side, because when I'm going round this side, when I'm joining the edge of the fabric, I'll do that side. So I'm just going to go round these other sides of that piece there. So I'm going to put the thread onto the edge of the fabric, tuck that end in nicely and then start doing blanket stitch like so. Try and keep my stitches nice and small if I can. I'm just going to run my thread to the back of the work and knot it when I've finished. So that last edge will be enclosed when I come to sew the reindeer together. Right, so I've done that piece. The smaller pieces, I think I might use a single thread of cotton rather than the 2 threads, because these pieces round here, I found that it was sort of, it looked too thick and chunky. So for these smaller ones here and here, I'll just use a single thread, but for this piece and this piece, I'll still use 2 threads. So I'm going to carry on doing that. I'm going to do this one at the bottom. The very, very fiddly ones come through the back. So I've come to the front of the work, and the first stitch I'm going to take into the applique and go through the loop, and I'm just going to work all the way around. With it being a smaller piece, I'm trying to make my stitches a little bit closer together. So there we are, that's one of the small little spots on its back. So I've turned to the back of the work. I'm going to knot the thread at the back and trim it, and then I can switch back to 2 threads to do the other pieces on this section of the reindeer. So I've done all the way round the spots on the body, round the ear, and then on the face I've just done sort of round here, but not the side that I'm going to actually stitch around when I come to join the pieces together. So now I'm going to go back and sew on the little nose. Right, so I'm popping my needle up just by the end of the nose here. That end will be tucked inside once we've sewn the body together. I'm going to pick one of these noses. I'm going to start stitching. This is going to be a bit fiddly. I could have probably done with doing 1 thread actually, so if you are doing it you could probably get away with 1 thread, whereas I've used 2 on this occasion. So I'm just knotting the thread at the back of the work. And I'm going to trim these. I've trimmed the thread that I've started on as well, just to neaten it up a little bit. So that's the one nose done. So now I've come to do the eye. Now I think it's really nice to place the eye just on this darker panel on the face, but you could move it to a different position if you wanted to, but I'm going to try and stick to the same position as I've got marked on my original design. I have got a schematic diagram in the pattern that you can refer to for this if you need any more help. So I've got a knot in the thread, put that in from the back of the work, and then I'm going to do a French knot. I'm going to wrap the thread 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep it nice and tight. Put it in again next to where you've come in. Keep the tension nice and tight with that left thumb. And there we go. That's that first eye. I'm going to sew the ends in at the back of the work and then do the second one. So I've wrapped around 4 times. I'm going in right next to where the thread come out, keeping the tension with that left thumb, pulling it back there. So now we have the other eye done. Again, I'm going to sew my ends in the back of the work just to secure it. There we go. So that's the eyes done. So I'm now going to sew the antlers. So we've got them pinned together, folded in half, and I'm just going to go in from the bottom because this inside edge is going to be inside the reindeer anyway, and I'm just going to sort of go from the corner edge and out towards the edge you're going to sew, and then I'm going to start doing the blanket stitch. I've got the knot sticking out to this side, but that doesn't matter because it's going to be inside the reindeer in the end. And do the same again, blanket stitch all the way around. So now I'm back around to sort of the end here. This is the folded edge. I'm not going to stitch all the way down that edge as well because it's already enclosed. I'm going to do a last stitch here. And then I'm actually going to thread the thread down the inside of the antler so that I can just knot it at the bottom, and I can actually use this thread now to sew it on. Now I did position the antler the first time in a slightly different orientation to what I'm going to do this one. So there's this orientation, but I thought this time I would have it facing backwards a little bit. So like this. So you can decide which one you like better. But I'm going to go for about there, and I have made a note of the orientation of both these versions on the little pattern piece that I've got as a download, so you know where to put it if you like where I've put it for either of these two. So there we go, that one is a little bit more facing backwards. We shall see what that looks like when I finished it, but I'm just knotting that in just to secure it. And I can do the same with the other antler on the other side. I think I prefer the antler going backwards actually. I don't know, I'll see what it looks like when it's finished. So there we are, I've got the two antler pieces stitched just onto the inside of here just to secure it, so that when I go to sew the pieces together I don't have to worry about making sure I put something in the right place. So I've got my little attachment ribbon and I fold it over like this, but then I turn the one side so that you've got a loop facing upwards, because I think it hangs a little straighter if you do it like that rather than just having it like this, because it'll have a loop to the side otherwise, if that makes sense. So fold it over like that, and then I can put that in the corner of the neck just there, and I'm going to pin it just to keep it like that until I then come along and just put a few stitches in there. And I like to put the little hanging thing in the corner of the neck, because if you look, the centre of balance is sort of there rather than putting it further up the body. So that's why I've put it there. So that's where I'm going to put the ribbon. I'm just going to go to the back of the work. I've got some thread already on my needle, and I'm going to stitch that on to the inside without going all the way through, just to tack it in place so that when I come around to stitch it all together, it's already in the place I want it to be. Just making sure that I don't go through. Right, so now we've got our attachment ribbon and the sides of the body done. I want to attach the sort of head part. Now the pointier bits are going down the body, and these more sort of fat triangle bits are supposed to match up with the ears. So I've done it so that they're in a sort of direction. So you can see that this edge sort of goes back a little bit more. That'll match up with one of these ears here, like so. So you want to make sure that you start the first attachment on the side where you're going to be working your blanket stitch from right to left. So because I'm going to be working to the front of this antler here, so I want to start on this side of it first. So I'm going to pin this ear into place, and then I'm going to start working from this point over the ear and down the back. rather than from the other side, which would mean I'd be starting from the inside of the work. So I want to be working on the outside of the antler, if that makes sense. You can see how I do it. So I've just done the last stitch that's right next to the antler, going all the way through. Then I'm just going to do the blanket stitch just through the front of the antler, and once we get to the other side we can start, oh, I've missed the loop there. Once we get to the other side of the antler we can start joining all the sides together again, and it should keep it nice and secure. Right, so now with the other side of the antler, like that. So now you've worked across the front of the antler, but it's still attached on the other side. I'm going to work up the ear. And when you get to the corner point, I'm going to do a stitch right in the top point of the ear, and then just work the way back down. You're using the same technique all the way around really, and I'm just working to the end point where that point goes down the back of the neck. There we go. So that side is attached to the top of the head, and what I can do now is start actually joining the rest. So I can now work all the way across the top of here, all the way down the legs, all the way around the legs, and as I'm doing so I'm going to be adding some stuffing. So what I am going to do is make sure that my thread is positioned so that it is to the outside of the work, and then I'm going to pop a few pins in just to make sure it is all aligned. Alright, so it's starting to come together a little bit. So like we did before where the antler was, because we've got this bit of ribbon, I'll just work into the front of the ribbon to hold it in place. And once that's in place, I can work to the other side. There we go. So obviously I'll need to come back when I come all the way around the outside. I've got to sew this side on as well, but it's nice, simple. Everything's sort of all together. I've just got to carry on doing a lot of blanket stitch now. So I'm going to work all the way around this edge. So I've got to the point here where I'm just going around the corner of the foot, and I just decided that I wanted to have a little bit of stuff in here. And this one I didn't actually stuff the legs at all, but I thought it might look nicer actually if I put some stuffing in the legs in this one. So I'm just using bits of leftover felt from when I cut out the other pieces and popping them in the leg to give it a little bit of structure really. You can put as much or as little as you like. And I'm going to do the same stuff in the body as well, probably give it a little bit more in the body. Right, so I've got to the point now where I've got to stuff the body, so I'll take the pin out and just put a little bit more stuffing in here. So I've still got some little scraps left, but I might have to cut some of the slightly bigger scraps left over from cutting out the pieces, so that it makes it stuffs it a bit more evenly. Then you could even put some of the threads in actually, as I've got a little pile of leftover bits here that I was going to either pop in here or in the bin, so might as well use them as stuffing rather than buy in separate load of stuffing. So I've got a piece here that I can chop into pieces. It's a bit small to really do much else with, so I might as well use it for stuffing. I think I'll use a little bit more. Right, so I'm going to leave that until I've stitched a bit more before I put any more stuffing in, I think. So I've sewn around this leg as well. I'm going to stuff this one a little bit. So I've now stitched all the way up this side. I didn't worry about stuffing this bit too much because this whole top bit's still open. So I've stitched all the way to the nose, and I'm not going to go around the nose because the nose is stitched in red and this is brown. So I'm going to just sort of stitch them together through the nose bit and then carry on stitching up this side. Right, so I've stitched right up to where the top of the head starts. I'm actually going to tie my thread and start the other side in a minute because it'll just make it easier working the other direction. So now working from, I'm going to start from this side and stitch all the way around here, but first I'm going to make sure that there's enough stuffing in there. So I'm going to rejoin the thread by the ribbon here, and I'm actually going to stitch this side of the thread even though I did that side before, just so that it makes it look a bit tidier and makes it a little stronger as well, because that's where it's going to hold on to. So I'm going to stitch along where this ribbon's attached. Right, so I'm carefully going to move that bit out of the way and start stitching up the neck. I think there's enough stuffing in there. I can always adjust it as I go, as I'm working up the reindeer. I might pop a little pin back in there again, just to hold it together. You can see how that's joined up now. I just got to go across here and then we're done. And again, I'm just working to the front of the antler here rather than going all the way through. I'm scooping the fabric from the antler and the part of the face in front of it, and then once I've worked across the antler I'll join the fabric again together. So there we go. I think I've finished stitching all the way around now. I'm going to knot my thread and thread the needle through the head just to secure it a little bit more. So there we go, the second one's finished. I had done the antlers in a slightly different position. They're facing a little bit back compared to the ones that are facing a bit forward. Not sure you could tell much difference anyway. There we go, we've made our little reindeer. So I hope you have fun having a go making your reindeer as well. I'd love to see what yours look like, so make sure you hashtag Craft House Magic Reindeer in your makes on Instagram and wherever, so I can see what they look like. Happy sewing and happy holidays to everybody.